A voice of rescue with a word to rescue from the series Your Patience Precedes Your Promise. And this message was or has been derived from the God's Word translation of Hebrews 6 verses 13 through 15. And this message is built around Abraham and how he received what God promised because he waited patiently for it. However, we cannot talk about patience and how it precedes your promise, and Abraham without not talking about Sarah and how Sarah responded to the promise. And so we are going to take a look now in Genesis 15, where it speaks of the word of the Lord coming to Abram. This was before Abram's name had been changed to Abraham. And so the word of the Lord came to Abram saying, you will, this is the promise, you will have a son, and this son will inherit everything that you own. And so this was the promise that God gave to Abraham, verse 4, and in verse 6, it says, and Abraham believed God, and then God considered him righteous, or he received God's approval, which is equivalent to being considered righteous, on the account of his faith. From Genesis 16 verses 1 through 5, and this is the Message translation, and it reads, Sarah, Abram's wife, hadn't yet produced a child. She had an Egyptian maid named Hagar, and so Sarah said to Abram, God has not seen fit to let me have a child. Sleep with my maid. Maybe I can get a family from her. Abram agreed to do what Sarah said, and so Sarah, Abram's wife, took her Egyptian maid Hagar and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. Abram had been living 10 years in Canaan when this took place. He slept with Hagar and she got pregnant. When Hagar learned she was pregnant, she looked down on her mistress. She looked down on Sarah. And Sarah told Abram, it's all your fault that I'm suffering this abuse. I put my maid in bed with you, and the minute she knows she's pregnant, she treats me like I'm nothing. May God decide which of us is right. And so God responds to this in Genesis 18 verses 10 through 14. And he basically gave a time frame for him bringing forth this promise that he would bring this son. And so it says that, and he brought this message in the form of angels. And so Sarah was listening at the tent opening just behind the man. Again, this is verses 10 through 14, Message translation. And it says, Abram and Sarah were old by this time, very old. Sarah was far past the age for having babies. So Sarah laughed within herself, an old woman like me get pregnant with this old man of a husband? God said to Abram, why did Sarah laugh, saying, me, have a baby? An old woman like me? Is there anything too hard for God? And he says, I'll be back about this time next year, and Sarah will have a baby. Now, this was reality TV before reality TV existed. And so Genesis 21 reads, and this is verses 1 through 4, God visited Sarah exactly as he said he would. God did to Sarah what he promised. Sarah became pregnant and gave Abram a son in his old age and at the very time God had set. Abram named him Isaac. When his son was 8 days old, Abram circumcised him just as God had commanded. Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Sarah said, God has blessed me with laughter, and all who get the news will laugh with me. She also said, whoever would have suggested to Abraham that Sarah would one day nurse a baby. Yet here I am. I've given the old man a son. And so I say to you that it is best to stick to God's plan. Patience does not take matters into his own hands, because when it does not become patience. It becomes disobedience, and it becomes impatience. And while you can believe that God is going to do what he said that he will do, you have to match up that belief with trust and allow it to become patience, that you will wait on the Lord regardless of how long that it takes, understanding that whatever remedy or solution that you come up, it will be just that. It will be an Ishmael, but it will not be an Isaac. And so patience doesn't create its own way. It has to stick with what God has said, and it doesn't seek alternative methods and alternative options such as Sarah did. And we must remember that this is why God doesn't need our help. He needs our obedience. He said, the Lord said that Abram would have a child. And regardless of Sarah's age, that was to be understood that that child was going to come from Sarah's womb despite her age. And so patience also understands that there is nothing too hard for God. So patience, for that reason, won't take matters into his own hands.